Hello students. Again, let us go back to the stress physiology that we have studied in the previous session, that is about water stress. And then let us come back to now this stress physiology of heat stress. That is, the today's topic is heat stress effect on plants and their resistance mechanism to heat stress. So the previous session recap is we have studied about the absorption of water, mechanism of absorption of water, and the factors affecting the rate of absorption. And then stress physiology class, in that the stress related to water we have studied, and what is stress we have studied, and then different types of mechanisms to combat this stress by plants also we have studied. You can see here in this session, we are studying the heat stress or high temperature stress. So this is high temperature, and you can see many response or inhibition or inhibitory activities will be there in the plant. This will affect the growth of the plants and finally the yield in agricultural crops. And this also finally affects the economy of any country for that matter. Even the high temperature just by increase by 1 or 2 degrees will have a negative effect on the crop yield. So some of the general effects of high temperature are like this. It inhibits seed germination, and there is reduction of plant growth, improper development of the plants, and alteration in photosynthesis. This is the one which is very important. This leads to so many other aspects. Whenever there is the photosynthetic rate is reduced, then there is alteration of the other metabolic pathways, which leads to low crop productivity. And then alteration in phenology, alteration in dry matter partitioning, and the yield reduction is there, reduction of crop quality, oxidative stress. This is the one which, like photosynthesis, will have many negative impact on the growth of the plant. And finally, water loss. Whenever there is increase in temperature, high temperature leads to water loss to maintain the proper temperature. And then, what is this heat stress? Now we have discussed many things about what the effects of general effects of heat stress. Then, what is heat stress? It is a rise in temperature beyond a threshold level for a period of time sufficient to cause irreversible damage to plant growth and development. That is, there will be high temperature, and that temperature actually affects the plant growth, and when the plant is exposed for a particular period of time, and this is nothing but a heat stress. And then this heat stress may be just above 10 to 15 degrees centigrade above the ambient or environmental temperature, and this results in heat shock or heat stress. It is a serious threat to crop production worldwide. Highest known temperature tolerant plants are there, many are there, and the examples that you all know are agaves and cacti. They can withstand up to a temperature of 60 degrees centigrade. That's why they are usually grown in arid regions or in desert regions. You can see this is agave, and this is a type of succulent plant, and they can be grown in very low water content and high temperature environments. And then just common effects. Let me tell you about the common effects that is occurring at the cellular level, or you can say molecular level. It's a common thing that I'm going to explain in this slide. That is, the plant enzymes are involved in metabolic pathways. Many plant enzymes are involved in the metabolic pathways that the plant, inside the plant, that is inside the plant cells are going on, and they have a specific thermal stability and kinetics at different temperatures. That is, they are temperature specific. And due to heat stress, there is change in the normal accumulation of metabolites. Normally, what are the metabolites that are accumulated, their accumulation is changed, and this leads to metabolic pathway differences. That is, there is a alteration in the metabolic pathways, and this alteration in the metabolic pathways result in the accumulation of different types of the metabolites. This leads to finally imbalance in metabolic routes. And now let us consider the effects one by one. The effects of heat stress on plants. Growth. It's the normal one each and every plant will have. That is the effect of heat on the growth. The first and foremost thing is there is reduction in the growth, reduced or inhibition of germination percentage. See, growth in all the plant parts, starting from the seed germination occurs. So, the effects are seen in the germination percentage, plant emergence, and then abnormal seedlings, poor seedling vigor, reduced radicle and plumule, and finally growth of germinated seedlings at the seedling level. And once the plant assumes the normal growth, or when it comes to a normal level, then also there is reduction in the growth. There is reduction in the growth. Next is reproduction, a short period of heat stress. A Actually it is significant to decrease the number of floral buds, and sometimes heat will make the flowers to abort. What happens when the flowers abort? The seeds are not set. No pollination, no seed setting, so it results in low crop production. And if it is a ornamental one, then you cannot sow the seeds because seeds are not at all produced. Plant may produce sometimes. There will not be any flower. Even if the flowers are produced, they will not produce the seeds or fruits. And then high temperature. Why this is happening? Why there is no flower formation, or even if there is flower formation, there is no seed or fruit formation? Because this high temperature impairs male and female organs, especially the gynecium and the androecium, and this leads to impaired pollen grain or impaired pollen germination and pollen tube growth, and then there will be reduced ovule viability and anomaly in stigmatic and style positions. So, because of these anomalies and then impaired sexual activities of these plant sex organs, there will not be any reproduction, or reproduction is reduced. And then effects of heat stress on plant yield. Increase of the seasonal average temperature just by 1 degree centigrade decreases the grain yield of cereals by 4 to 10%. It is quite a significant reduction because ours is an agricultural country, and if there is any reduction up to this, then we have to face serious economic problems. Then the sensitive crop varieties severely affected by heat stress is relative to tolerant varieties. See, the sensitive crop varieties are severely affected. There are crop varieties which are actually sensitive to heat. They are severely affected by heat stress when compared to heat tolerant varieties. That's why there are many varieties of cereal crops and then legumes and so many other crops which are actually tolerant to heat are produced by the hybridization techniques. And next, the most important one is oxidative stress. That is, ROS or reactive oxygen species accumulate at the plasma membrane, and this trigger programmed cell death. So what happens? There is PCT, then finally many cells will die. Finally, it may result in death of the plant. And then the photosynthesis. This is the major one, and the effect which is caused on photosynthesis will indirectly affect all other metabolic activities of the plant. And there is a negative impact on photosynthesis. It hampers the photosynthesis, and there is reduction of soluble proteins and then rubisco binding proteins because it is a very essential enzyme for photosynthesis. Heat stress affects starch and sucrose synthesis by reduced activity of sucrose phosphate synthetase, ADP glucose pyrophosphorylase, and invertase. All these are reduced. The activities of all these enzymes are reduced, and then there is reduction in the leaf water potential, reduction in the leaf area, and premature leaf senescence, which actually are the most important negative impacts on total photosynthesis. Because if the leaf area is reduced, then surface area for the photosynthesis to take place is reduced. So this finally leads to reduction in the photosynthesis. And next is prolonged heat stress. If the heat stress is for a very long period of time, this leads to depletion of carbohydrate reserves, and finally the plant will starve to death. And then respiration. It is also negatively affected by reducing the rate. And then cell membranes dysfunction. The stability of the cell membrane is reduced. See, the cell membranes are composed of lipids, plasma membrane, and then there are carbohydrates, and then the composition of this will be changed so that there will be permeability and then leakage of ions. There is loss of permeability or change in the permeability and leakage of ions, and then some can go out, some ions can enter, and then this leads to change in the cytosol, and finally may result in many changes in the metabolic activities of the cell. Then denaturation of proteins and nucleic acids takes place at higher temperature. This also has a severe effect on the plant cells. And based on the tolerance of the plants to heat, there are it is the plants are classified into following types. Psychrophiles are the low temperature tolerant varieties, and then mesophiles that they require the optimum temperature, and the thermophiles that is heat resistant or they can withstand high temperature. In this there are three types. These are the very important ones, because these actually in many crop varieties thermophiles have been produced by the crop improvement methods and hybridization method, so that they can be grown in high temperature areas. So this consists of actually three types: heat sensitive species, relatively heat sensitive or relatively heat resistant species, and then heat tolerant species. Then the resistance, how it takes place in plants, the mechanisms, let us consider now. One is acclimation to high temperature. See, soybean seedlings which are exposed to a very high temperature for a very brief period of time, it can survive in a very high temperature. This is a very important thing. That is, first, if the plant seedlings or seeds are exposed to high temperature, they can tolerate higher temperature later on. Then membrane composition, presence of saturated fatty acids in membrane lipids helps to maintain stability and fluidity at high temperature. Examples are agave and cacti. The succulents, you can quote the examples of succulents. Then morphological adaptations. These are very important morphological adaptations. That is, heat is actually very high heat. How the plants get it is from the radiation, solar radiations. Plants will be growing in the our external environment directly exposed to solar radiations. So how to avoid it? That is one mechanism. There are many different types of structures or modifications in the morphological structures, like in the leaves and in the stem, are adopted by plants to avoid heat radiations, and also overheating by solar radiations. These are the things which the plants are modified. Vertical orientation of the leaves, rolling their leaves along the axis, reflective leaf hairs, waxy leaf surfaces, cuticle, and smaller deeply dissected leaves to minimize the boundary layer thickness, and these maximize heat loss by convection and conduction. So boundary layer thickness and these are the important ones, and they maximize actually, and these are the things which minimize the heat loss by convection and conduction. And then heat shock proteins, these are very important ones. Heat shock proteins are very important ones, and these are low molecular mass proteins. Heat shock proteins are acting as molecular chaperones. These molecular chaperones protect essential enzymes and nucleic acids from heat denaturation and misfolding, and they're synthesized in cells very rapidly in response to heat shock. For example, uh, when soybean seedlings are suddenly exposed for increase in 2 degrees centigrade to 40 degrees centigrade, within 3 to 5 minutes, heat shock proteins are synthesized. And then they just for that exposure, for a brief period of exposure, and then they will come to normal after this stress is removed. With the return of the normal temperature, heat shock proteins are no longer produced and protein synthesis also returns to normal. So these heat shock proteins are not very they're not present in the cells throughout, but they're short-lived. Whenever the cell comes to normal ambient temperature, it will go back or it gets denatured. And this is the schematic illustration of heat induced signal transduction mechanism and how the heat tolerance is developed in the plants. So high temperature, this leads to oxidative stress. There is oxidative stress due to high temperature, and this results in disruption of membrane properties and then protein enzymes and cellular homeostasis. And there are transcriptional factors which actually helps in activation of stress responsive genes. That is, stress responsive genes are activated now, and the result of this is activation of antioxidant enzymes, free radical scavengers, signaling molecules, and osmoprotectants. And this actually leads to reactive oxygen species are already formed, the detoxification of ROS, reactivation of protein and enzymes, and re-establishment of cellular homeostasis. Once the homeostasis is established, then plants will not have any problem further, and this leads to heat resistance. So there are plants which are resistant to heat, and it can be developed by exposure to high temperature for a short period of time when they are in the young condition. And another thing is heat avoidance. Plants will avoid, there are plants which avoid heat. How it avoids heat? There are many mechanisms by which plants avoid heat. The most important ones, and maybe you are all knowing about this, the closure of stomata, and this leads to reduced water loss. When there is water loss is reduced, then that water is remaining in the plant. So that water maintains the temperature balance, and then avoiding heat stress by reducing the absorption of solar radiation by various methods, by reduction in the life of size of the leaves, and also by making the leaves very narrow. All these things will be there. And then there are small tomentose hairs present on the plant, and then cuticle, very thick cuticle present on the plant surface, and then waxy coating will not allow the heat radiation to enter inside. And then orientation of the leaves parallel to sun rays, and then leaf rolling, leaf abscission, leaving heat resistant buds, or in desert annuals by completing the entire reproductive cycle during the cooler months. Especially in desert plants, the entire life cycle is many plants completes their its life cycle during the cooler, comparatively cooler time or cooler months, and during very hot period they will not they will be in the form of seeds or some resistant forms. So to summarize this session, uh, the high temperature causes heat injuries, and there is synthesis of heat shock proteins. There are various mechanisms of heat stress, and then heat tolerance mechanism is there, and then heat avoidance mechanism adopted by plants. And these heat stress mechanisms are very, very important from the point of view of agriculture, because if the temperature is increased, then there is definitely decrease in the yield of the agriculture produce, and this will definitely result in the loss of or yield loss of money or reduced income for any farmer. So this is a serious matter of concern. A better understanding of these tolerant mechanisms can be used to breed crops or to improvise the already present crops to yield better in a very high temperature stress and also salinity stress which I'll be taking in the next session. Thank you for your patient listening.